Is there any sound on this? Okay. I think now we've got sound. I want to welcome everybody. You've got a full house tonight.
Yeah, pretty is it?
Yeah.
Take the Nesius family out here.
That's right. Okay, we want to welcome everybody here for session 4. I know that you guys are going to be in for a real treat because I know that Tom's been doing a lot of homework. This is Professor Tom Nesi behind me. And I see a lot of Nesies in the crowd, so they're going to be able to help fill in the cracks. I know that Marvin's here and Gerald's here, so they're going to be able to help if there's anything that needs to be filled in on. So at that, I welcome everyone here, and I'll turn it over to Tom.
Okay. Thank you, Mike. Well, first of all, I want to thank the Miller family and Alice Beth and Tom Korniak for filling in for us a couple weeks ago. And I want to thank everybody in this community for supporting our family the last couple of weeks. It's been a pretty tough go. Okay, we're going to start this out, first of all, talking about this man right here. I got to turn this on. Which one is it now? Zoom? There it goes. Does that look like anybody familiar in here? His face is probably red. Well, this is John Joseph Nesius. And in Jasper County, it's pronounced Nesi. But it was spelled when he came over, and on all the mortgage or all the signings that he done in business, that he spelled it Nisius. And up till the day he died, that's the way he signed his name. But then on his tombstone, it's Nesius. So I think his sons had something to do about that. He was born in Quittaba, Germany, in 1841. He came to the United States in 1870 with his sister Gertrude Nesi. Him and his sister is the only two to come across. They landed in New York and moved in the Orland Park, Illinois area, which is about 60 to 80 miles north of here. And he worked in a stone quarry there until the mid-1880s to pay for his way getting over here from the trip from Germany. In 1871, he married Anna Mary Steffens. So that's just about a year after he was here. He married her, and they lived in the Orland Park area. Later, his sister Gertrude married Matthias Steffens. So brother and sister married brother and sister, or brother married sister and sister married brother. And he didn't know this, but he kind of started a generation, he didn't know this, but he started a tradition back then, because his oldest son Frank and his youngest son Joe married sisters, the Zacher girls, and they lived north of Rensselaer. And then the next generation, they didn't let it die. Fred and my dad Arthur married sisters, the Allison girls from south of Remington. And then my brother Bruce and I married sisters. So it's kind of fallen down in all the generations, and I don't think he would have ever dreamed anything like that would have happened. John Joseph and Anna Mary had 9 children. 3 died at an early age. All his sons farmed and raised big families in the early 1900s. Every one of his grandchildren remembered their lifestyles and really cherished that part of their life. Let's see. I don't know whether you can see that, but this is the plat book. It's not clear enough, is it? Well, that's evidently the clear it's going to be. In 1852, the land that we're talking about was in military land. and the United States government granted this land to James Brooks for his military service. In 1853, he sold it to Charles Bill for $18 an acre. And that was in 1853. And in 1854, John Joseph bought this off of Charles Bill, this 80 acres, for a sum of $400, which figures $5 an acre. And that one guy, the land dropped quite a bit from when he bought it, so land fluctuated a lot back then. Then in 1887, Joss bought 120 acres 1 mile north in section 28 in Jordan Township, which I'm pretty sure, I don't know whether we can see it up here or not, but it's right up here in this area. And that, let's see, that is where the homestead started. There was, that's where he lived and raised his family. And when he come down here, we always thought that probably all the kids were born in that house. But as we got looking at the dates and everything they was born, the oldest son was 10 years old, and Joe would probably have been the only one that was born in that house. He was born in 1887. So his family was pretty well raised when he moved down here. Not pretty well raised, but they were born when he moved down here. That's something new that I learned from all this. Okay, this is the house that they lived in all them years. Okay, now I want to talk about the land on that other side. He also, after he bought that farm, he bought 200 acres in Milroy Township. On the homestead, there was a house, and it was added on many, many times through the years. Most of the children were born before they moved there. It was and this house stayed there on the farm till 1990. Then that's a utility shed. This should come in clearer than that. It's not coming in real clear. That's a utility shed and a smokehouse there. And they butchered their own meat, and they used that smokehouse to smoke the meat in. And that stood there for over 100 years before it came down. Now I'm going to try and enlarge this. In 1896, he built the bank barn. That was the first building that John Joseph built, because the house was already on the farm, we was pretty sure of. And in this barn, it had 6 stalls for the horses on the main floor. And it had 12 stanchions on the lower floor. In other words, this is a 3-tier barn. And where the stanchions for the cows were, they actually had to go underneath the barn to get in. And this picture will show how that is. That door right there is where the cows went in. And there's 12 stanchions in a row underneath there, and all that underneath is lined with rock and mortar. And it's still standing in real good shape today. So they milked a lot of cows down there.
A lot of the reasoning, I think, behind that is because in the wintertime it's warmer down in there to go out and handle the cattle and stuff. That was done in Germany quite often. A lot of their dairy barns were built like down under the ground for warmth in the wintertime.
Yep. And then on the upper level, but where the upper part is all haymow. And all that barn, it was built with wood pegs, so there wasn't any nails in it. The only nails in it is what Jim and I put in it to hang stuff up. Then later on, he built a crib and granary and a little shed behind that barn. He didn't really. He was very proud of that barn. And Uncle John, I can always remember all the kids. They was very, very proud of that barn. Okay. Farming back then, the big event back then was threshing oats. It took 5 acres of oats to keep one horse. So if you run 10 to 12, 13 horses, it took quite a few acres of oats to keep them horses. So oats and corn was their main crop back 100 years ago. And they all had big threshing runs back then, and usually the neighbors. That's all them in there, isn't it? Is that good? Okay, this is from left to right is Frank Nesi, Henry Scheid, John Nesi, and Tony Nesi. And they own the thrashing run. There's the thrasher and the steam engine and all that, and they thrashed many, many acres of oats over all them years. And Uncle John, he thrashed oats. He was one of the last ones to quit thrashing oats, and he thrashed oats up till 1940. And that thrasher stayed in that barn for many years too. Whoa, am I going to get all that in there? How about that?
Shrinker.
Shrinker the other way. Nope, the other way. How about that?
Now move it over there.
There you go.
Is that in there? Okay. In 1917, John Joseph Nesi owned approximately 600 acres of land, and he split it up with his children. The will we have up here at the table on display shows how he accomplished it. He built ditches and put some tile in during his lifetime, and his sons worked hard along his side, and they worked hard to really get all this land farmed. The land was divided up in 80-acre segments. John Nesi lived on the homestead where the house was, and 80 acres to the west. Tony Nesi lived south of the homestead, the 80 acres that I talked about earlier, the first 80 acres he bought. And Frank lived west of the homestead, and Matthew lived north of the homestead. And the youngest son, Joseph, the other brothers bought him out, and he took his money. He was probably the smartest one of them all. He took his money, come down here at Rensselaer, and bought on 114. And he was a very successful farmer. And Aunt Mary, she got land north of the home place in Milroy Township. And grandfather Joseph, John Joseph, and Mary moved to Rensselaer. John and this generation here, these boys here, they had 80 acres given to them, but it was all mortgaged. So they had to really work hard to get it all paid off over them years. And on the mortgages I read, my great-grandpa John Joseph, he remortgaged this farm, the 80 acres I was talking about earlier, he remortgaged it 8 different times. And the rate of interest on the money was 6 to 8%, which isn't much different what it is today. And the first mortgage, the first principal he had to pay off on the first mortgage was $200. And on the 8th mortgage in 1912, he had it mortgaged for $9,000, this 80 acres. So there was a big change. There was, this is how he acquired all this land. The land value would go up, so he mortgaged it and bought more land. He wanted to keep his boys on the farm, and basically that's how he did it. All these sons farmed the land and raised their families. It wasn't an easy life because the Depression hit them hard. my grandfather Frank had to go to carpenting while his sons farmed the land to make it through the hard times. All of his sons kept their farms through the Depression, and that says a lot about them boys, because that was hard times, and every one of them didn't lose their farm. They kept it, and they paid all their debts. And one of the stories during the hard times is my grandpa Frank, which he's the center one. I'm going to explain all these. This is Frank, and this is John, that's Matt, and that's Tony, and this is Joe, the youngest, and that's Mary down there on the end. Okay, I was going to tell a story here. Oh yeah, I was going to tell a story about Frank building a house for Matt. And it took him 2 years to do it, because he evidently was the carpenter in the family. And his pay for building that house for him was a cow. And I can always remember my dad telling Grandpa about that. And there's not too many brothers today would do that for his brother, would they? You get a cow and you still had to milk him. John Joseph had his schooling in Germany. And all the kids, let's see, that's in there, zoom it in. His sons and grandchildren went to a little 2-room country school called Blake, which was about a mile and a half from the homestead. And it's a little 2-room school. It was built in 1870, and they held school there till 1938. The kids did a lot of walking back in, because they had to walk to school. And as I can remember, there was a lot of stories told about the Blake School, because most of the ones that went, all of John's kids and Grandpa Frank's kids and Tony's kids, they all went to the same school, so they pretty well walked to school together, met each other, and they went to the 8th grade at this school. And then if they went to high school, they either went to Remington or Rensselaer to finish out their high school. And some of the stories that I've heard on when they went to school, one of them was Raymond, in my dad's family, was kind of the one that probably got into trouble the most, according to his brothers. And on the way to school, they trapped the ditches. So they run their trapping run before they went to school. Well, one morning they got down there and there was a skunk in the trap. So Raymond, he did it real easily, tried to get that skunk out of there, and he got sprayed. So he wasn't going to go back home and tell his mom and dad what happened, so he went on to school. And his dad tells the story, he didn't stay in school very long. They sent him home right away. And another story that really amazed me, these brothers did a lot of different things to earn money. And one of them was, they had a guy in Chicago that would buy rabbits from them. During the Depression, that was a big thing. Rabbit stew was a big thing up there in Chicago. And he'd come down and furnish the shells for these boys to shoot rabbits. And they would walk a mile of a ditch bank and shoot 300 rabbits on the way through there. They'd take a horse on each side of the ditch bank, and them horses would be full of rabbits by the time they get down to the other end, and they got 50 cents a piece for them. So these boys, they was really interested in when this guy come down to buy rabbits off of them. Is there any other stories cousins want to tell on them?
Well, the rabbits were made into stew and custard pepper, and he gave that away as a meal, but he sold booze on the side, and that's why he got the rabbits.
Yeah.
He was a big cook, and he ran a tavern in Chicago.
My great-grandmother died in 1924. And then after her death, great-grandfather moved out of the house in town and moved back to the farm to live with his sons. And that was for 2 years. He died in 1926. But some of the stories that they told on that, he lived with Grandpa Frank as long as they would keep him there. When they got tired of him, he moved on to one of the other brothers. And he did that quite a bit. And one of the better stories I heard my dad tell about Grandpa when he was living there at the home place is all the cousins would come over on Sundays and they'd get into a corn cob fight. And they'd take the corn cobs and put them in the horse tank and get them good and wet so they'd sting real good. And great-grandpa, he always was nosing around outside to see what them grandkids were doing. And he stuck his nose around the crib and one of them corn cobs come and hit him on the nose and put a big sore on there. And he went, when Grandpa would cuss, he'd cuss in German because he didn't want his grandkids to know what he was saying, but the grandkids knew what he was saying anyhow. So he went back in the house cussing and asking Grandma if they could find something else for them boys to do. But he was always outside seeing what the boys were doing. Cousins seen a lot of each other back then, and they had a lot of good times together. And John Joseph died in 1926, and him and his wife are buried in a Catholic cemetery half a mile south of here. My great-grandfather and my grandfather farmed during the horse and buggy days. It was a hard life, but it was a simple one. Now, my father's and his brother's generation saw the biggest change in the farming industry of any generation that's probably ever going to live. I don't think for how they got to see the horse and buggy days, and they went through all the revolution of the machinery and everything over all these. And I'm going to show some pictures of when they started out. This is Uncle Fred and his 2 horses when he was first married. And this is my dad and his team of horses when he was first married. They evidently had a lot of pictures of horses. They must have been pretty proud of them. And this is my dad planting corn on a corn planter. Then I'm going to put one more picture in and I'll go on. This is when the big change started coming in, the automobile. That's Uncle Fred and my dad. They have a lot of stories to tell about the automobile. But before we're going to start about this automobile, I did forget one story I wanted to tell about John Joseph. Then we're going to start with this other generation. And I had Diane and I, when we were first married, we got to go down and talk to Uncle John, but he was probably in his mid-80s. And this story that he told me that always stuck in my mind was about his grandmother. Or not his grandmother, his mom. And he said back in them days, if the horses were all out in the field and she had to go down and get groceries, she walked. And that was 7 miles to town and 7 miles back. Now, I don't know whether there's any women do that today, but they did it back then. He got to take one of the sons with him, but that'd be pretty tough. And then she was still a pretty devoted wife, because some of the things that she had to put up, I don't think they'd do today. And John Joseph, he'd go to the tavern, and on his way home some nights, the horses would just come in. And Grandma would go in the house and get the sons out and tell the boys to put the horses up and get him out. He'd be laying in the wagon. And she'd take him in the house. Well, one night, the horses in the wagon come home. They went out to get him, and he wasn't in the wagon. So they got her horse and buggy out, and they drove back, and about 1.5 miles west of Blake School, there he was in the ditch. Now, today, I don't know, I don't think my wife would do that for me. But they had a hard life back then, and you know, they did what it took to make it go, and they made her go. Got to appreciate it. The automobile and the tractor and small machinery made big changes for this generation. And then after the war, things kept really changing. And if you didn't keep up, you was left behind. They saw corn yields go from 40 bushel to 140 bushel. They saw soybeans used as hay and for livestock, and then used as a grain crop in rotation with corn. They saw the old dirt roads changed to gravel roads and some blacktops in the country. And then they got to see the super highways that were being built. They lived during the beginning of the electricity and all the new appliances in the telephone. A gentleman named Mark Siegel wrote a book called my dad's generation, called Born at the Right Time. And it's a very interesting book. If you ever get a chance to read it, it's very, very interesting. It tells all about what they did back then. And probably they were probably born at the right time if you wanted to see progress. And what was interesting back then, too, is these guys got to shuck corn by hand, and it took them a whole day to shuck 100 bushel. And they received 1 cent a bushel for shucking the corn. Some of the boys did. That's what they got paid. So they got paid not too much. Then when the biggest change probably come with them is when the corn picker come in. If it took you all day to pick 100 bushel by hand, believe me, there's a better way. And they soon found out. I think this is a picture. I think that's Uncle Fred on the picker, and that's Marvin probably on that tractor. That's usually where you seen Marvin, on the tractor seat. But my dad and Freddie owned the first corn picker around together. They did a lot of picking for custom picking too after they got their own out. They went from a 2-row corn picker. Then on the later part of their lives, they went to seeing the corn harvested with a combine. So they went from 100 bushel a day and probably to a 2-row corn picker of 1,000 bushel a day, and then they went to a combine to do 5,000 bushel a day, and they did all this in probably 20 years. Now, that's a big change for them people. They stored ear corn in cribs that they built, and then they went ahead, they built grain dryers, and they built grain bins in the early 70s. I don't know how they kept up, but they did. Farming today is a whole lot different than what it was 100 years ago. This is probably the poorest picture. You guys can't see it. This is the farm. In 1969, my brother Jim and I bought 120 acres that Anthony owned for $450 an acre. This is where I live now. It had a house, a crib, and an old garage, and a big A-frame barn on it. And that barn there was built in 1920. In 1980, we bought 160 that Uncle John owned for $1,800 an acre. This is where Jim lives now. We have added machinery sheds and grain bins and restored the barns. We restored both the barns. We put tin siding on them. The reason we did that, colored siding on it, is to preserve the wood. And we're hoping that will last our lifetime. In 1987, Now here's a better picture of that barn, I think. In 1987, we had a family reunion. And we had over 250 relatives attend that. They come from everywhere. And a lot of them that's in here today attended that. It was probably one of the most gratifying moments of our lives. And we were very honored to carry this homestead on. We're only here for a very short time, and family is a very important way of life. Our forefathers pretty well showed us the way. And that's kind of, I think, do we have any more stories from the cousins?
Well, Tom, you mentioned the last time that went by that our father saw going from farm with horses to electricity and so on and so forth. And I'm not, of course, as old as they are, but I can tell you one of the grandest things that I enjoyed was when we got electricity and running water. And I tell you that toilet seats in the wintertime out there outside were cold. And a lot of times I'd run out there before I'd go to bed at night and I wouldn't quite make it. It's wonderful to have lights inside, electricity, water, and the conveniences that we have today. And I'm just kind of curious, I'd like to know, maybe by a show of hands tonight, how many descendants are here tonight from the old fellow's picture. Okay. If you hold up your hands, I'd like to count you, just for fun here. 3, 4, 5, 6, 10. I thought there might be more than that. Okay, thank you.
Gerald?
One other comment on this picture here, that does not include near all of them either. Because
No.
there were several of descendants that weren't able to make it.
Yeah.
And they, descendants of that family live on from one coast to the other.
Do you remember approximately how many were there, or did you have to?
Over 250. Yeah, right at 250. A lot of young ones. That's what amazed me. This younger generation is interested in their history.
Tom?
Okay, Bob?
I was at the reunion, and it was really a worthwhile reunion. In fact, there were 2 other Bosnians there I wasn't aware of. I knew there was one, but I didn't know there was 2.
Yeah.
And there is 2 more. The interesting part I never really thought of before is one lady says, "Did you look in the phone book?" And she said, "Yes, there's 17 Nesius there." And of course, where they live, scattered out like this, it's probably just one or their close descendants. But they have 17 Nesius in one phone book. So that shows you the nucleus of the Nesius are right in this area. They're pretty home-bodied people, I guess.
Yeah, they pretty well stayed together. And another thing that my dad's generation did, and all his cousins, was hunt arrowheads. And they had a pretty good collection of arrowheads, and I think Bob kind of followed through on that. That got one of the cousins that stayed with him. And they did several things together. It was, a lot of family was involved.
They did a lot of fox hunting.
Yeah, they did a lot of fox hunting. Okay, I got a copy of his will up here. This is how he divided the land between the kids, and then we got copies of the old deeds. And then Rose Klaus has got a book up here called Aunt Molly's Diary. She's wrote this about her family, and it's pretty interesting too. So afterwards here, when we're done or now we can just, I'm done, so we can just look all this over and see what it's like. Has anybody else got anything? Okay, do we have any?
Did you bring the arrowhead?
abstracts look like. They come in books like that.